up for herself. But she was afraid. Afraid of Patricia, afraid of what Martha might do if she didn't obey, and afraid of how the guests would look at her if she caused a scene. But before Ivy could respond, something unexpected happened. The music stopped abruptly, and a voice echoed across the ballroom. "What's going on here?" The guests parted like the sea, and standing there at the center of attention was Prince Ade himself. His eyes were sharp, taking in the scene in front of him. Martha standing arrogantly with her nose in the air, and Ivy, her face pale and frightened, holding Martha's shawl. Martha, thinking quickly, smiled sweetly at the prince. "Your Highness, it's nothing. Just a little fun between cousins. Ivy here loves to play the servant. It's a game we've been playing since we were children." Ivy flinched. It wasn't a game. Had never been a game. But Prince Ade wasn't fooled. His eyes narrowed as he looked at Martha, then back at Ivy. Slowly he stepped forward and addressed Ivy directly. "Is that true?" he asked, his voice kind but firm. "Is this a game?" Ivy hesitated. She felt the weight of everyone's gaze on her, and for the first time, she realized that this was her chance. She could tell the truth. She could speak up for herself. And so, with a trembling voice, Ivy finally found the courage to say, "No, it's not a game." The room fell silent. Patricia, who had been watching from the edge of the ballroom, froze. Martha's face turned bright red with embarrassment and anger. Prince Ade studied Ivy for a moment, then turned to Martha. "I see," he said coldly. "In that case, I think we should have a conversation, young lady. This event was meant to honor the guests invited, not to humiliate them." Martha opened her mouth to protest, but before she could say anything, Prince Ade signaled for a servant to come forward. "Please take this young lady and her cousin to my private study. I think we need to clear some things up." As the servant led Ivy and Martha away, Ivy felt a mixture of fear and relief. Fear of what might happen next, and relief that for once, someone had seen through the lies. In the prince's study, the air was tense. Ivy sat nervously, while Martha crossed her arms, glaring at her as though this was all her fault. Patricia, who had hurried to the room, was pacing back and forth, trying to think of a way to salvage the situation. Prince Ade entered the room with a quiet authority. He stood before them and looked directly at Ivy. "Ivy, I've heard a lot about you," he said gently. "Your mother was a great woman. It seems you've been through a lot since she passed away." Ivy nodded, her heart heavy with memories of her mother. She didn't know what to say. No one had spoken kindly to her in so long. Prince Ade turned to Patricia and Martha, his tone changing to one of firmness. "What's going on here? I want the truth." Patricia, always quick with her lies, began speaking smoothly. "Your Highness, it's all a misunderstanding. Ivy's been troubled since her mother's death. We've done everything we can to help her, but..." "That's not true," Ivy interrupted, her voice rising with emotion. She surprised even herself with her outburst. "They've treated me like a servant. They've been cruel to me every day since my mother died. I'm supposed to inherit my mother's fortune when I turn 16, but Patricia and Martha," Ivy's voice cracked, "they've been making my life miserable. They don't care about me." Martha gasped, and Patricia's eyes darkened with anger. But Prince Ade's expression didn't change. He listened carefully, weighing Ivy's words. "Ivy," the prince said softly, "thank you for telling me the truth." He then looked at Patricia, his eyes cold. "I'll be contacting Ivy's lawyer in the morning. If what she says is true, then you've broken your duty as her guardian." Patricia tried to speak, but Prince Ade raised his hand, silencing her. "This is a matter for the courts. But for now, Ivy will remain under my protection until this situation is resolved." Ivy couldn't believe what she was hearing. For the first time in years she felt safe. She felt like someone was finally listening. Patricia, beaming with rage, realized she had lost control. She stormed out of the study with Martha trailing behind her, leaving Ivy alone with the prince. Prince Ade smiled kindly at Ivy. You've been through enough. But don't worry. This will all be over soon. Ivy blinked back tears, overwhelmed with emotion. For the first time in a long time, she felt like everything was going to be okay. The days after Prince Ade's intervention were a whirlwind for Ivy. True to his word, Prince Ade had contacted her late mother's lawyer, and within a week, the courts had begun investigating Patricia's guardianship. It wasn't long before all of Patricia's lies and cruelty were exposed. Patricia and Martha were stripped of any claim to Ivy's inheritance, and their reputation in high society was ruined. They had no choice but to leave the city, retreating in disgrace to a quiet, forgotten village far from Lagos. For Ivy, it felt like a huge weight had been lifted off her shoulders. She no longer had to live under their oppressive control, and for the first time in years she could breathe freely. Prince Ade had kept his promise, ensuring that Ivy's rightful inheritance was restored to her. But more than that, he had offered her a home at the palace until she was old enough to manage her estate on her own. Ivy was overwhelmed by his kindness. The palace became a place of comfort and security, far different from the cold, loveless home she had known with Patricia. One afternoon, as Ivy walked through the lush palace gardens, she reflected on how much her life had changed. She no longer had to worry about what tomorrow might bring or fear Patricia's angry outbursts. For the first time she had a sense of peace. But there was still one thing that troubled her. Though she was now free from Patricia's control, Ivy couldn't help but feel unsure of herself. She had spent so many years being told she was worthless, that she had begun to believe it. Even with all her newfound freedom, she still struggled to see her own value. As she sat on a stone bench beneath a large tree, Ivy heard footsteps approaching. She looked up to see Prince Ade walking toward her with a warm smile. "Ivy, how are you settling in?" he asked kindly. I'm doing well, Your Highness," Ivy replied, though her voice lacked confidence. She looked down at her hands, nervously twisting the fabric of her dress. Prince Ade sat down beside her, studying her face carefully. "You don't have to call me Your Highness," he said with a chuckle. "We're friends now, aren't we?" Ivy smiled faintly but didn't respond. She wasn't sure what to say. The prince had been so good to her, but she still felt out of place in his world of wealth and luxury. "Ivy," Prince Ade said softly, his tone turning serious, "I know you've been through a lot, but you should know that none of what happened was your fault. You're not worthless, and you never were. Patricia's cruelty doesn't define who you are." Ivy swallowed hard, trying to hold back tears. She had never expected anyone, especially someone like the prince, to speak to her with such kindness. I don't know who I am anymore," Ivy admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've spent so long being told that I'm nothing, that it's hard to believe otherwise." Prince Ade nodded, understanding her pain. "I get it. It's not easy to shake off years of being mistreated, but you're stronger than you think. You've already come so far, Ivy. And now you have the chance to build a new life for yourself, one that's free from all the lies and cruelty." Ivy wiped away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't helped me." "You would have found a way," the prince said with a smile. "You're resilient. But I'm glad I could be there for you." The two sat in comfortable silence for a while, the soft rustling of the trees and the chirping of birds filling the air. For the first time, Ivy allowed herself to feel a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could find her place in the world after all. As the months passed, Ivy's confidence slowly grew. With the support of Prince Ade and the palace staff, she began to take control of her own life. She started to make decisions about her inheritance and future, learning how to manage the estate that her mother had left behind. It was a steep learning curve, but Ivy was determined to prove to herself that she was capable. Prince Ade continued to be a constant presence in her life.